Today on Inside Utah Politics, National Suicide Prevention Month. We're discussing the grip it has on our state and how Utahns can work together to reverse the devastating trend. Plus, 3 former presidents of the United States teaming up to help Afghan refugees get settled here in the United States. We go in depth on their plan.
Time now for Inside Utah Politics.
Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Glenn Mills. It is time to go inside Utah politics. September is National Suicide Prevention Month, and that's where we do begin this morning. Kristen Barlow is the Executive Director of Dance for Life, Suicide Prevention and Good Mental Health, and Scott Langenecker is a clinical therapist. So glad to have both of you on the show. This is a really important conversation to be tackling. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Scott, let's start with you. Paint the picture for us here in Utah. It's really having a devastating effect in our state. A lot of us know someone who has committed suicide and the impact of that, whether it's a family member, a friend, especially among teenagers. Talk to us about the grip this has on our state.
It's a surprising statistic. The number one, not number 5, not number 10, the number 1 cause of death amongst our teens is lost by suicide. So all the things that we think of in protecting our children from harm, this should be number 1 on your list. And in Utah, we are in the top 10 in the country in terms of suicide deaths. And so this is something that state, local, university, community leaders have taken seriously. And over the last few years, we've seen a leveling off in number of deaths, and we're hoping to turn the trend the other way.
Mm-hmm. It's startling to think about that. The number 1 cause of death of young people, not car accidents, anything else, but taking their own lives. So very important point to bring up there. Kristen, let's bring you in and talk about when we focus on awareness, there's a stigma to this, and it's really important to overcome that. So talk about the impact that can have.
Oh, absolutely, and that was one of the main reasons I decided to pursue suicide prevention and this nonprofit, was because there is such a stigma with mental health. I have a son that suffers from mental illness. I have a daughter that also had some bullying and things in high school, had suicidal thoughts. These things are much more common than we think, and we are so good at taking care of our physical bodies. We have such great tools, but sometimes we do not have the tools for mental health. And there's a stigma with it that's, for some reason, if you have a mental problem or a mental stress or something that's happened mentally, that suddenly we don't have resources, and there is a stigma that's associated with you're not as smart, there's something wrong with you, instead of treating it just like it would be physical health.
Yeah, and some feel shameful in having to admit that when they shouldn't.
Right.
Scott, let's get into the pandemic, because this was an issue even before that, and now we're seeing things multiplied because people are alone, they're isolated. What impact is that having?
Yeah, there's a couple of factors that seem to be particularly challenging our kids. So those of us who are adults, we've endured some hardships before. We've had down days, we've had weird things happen. But for many of our kids, the pandemic has been the first big challenge that they've experienced. And we combine that with isolation, loneliness, and lots of time spent with remote learning or doing homework on computer screens, less time spent outside in social activities. This is a perfect storm for kids to have more suicidal crises.
Kristen, you talked about your own children suffering with mental health. What tips do you have when it comes to breaking the ice and having this hard conversation when it may be uncomfortable?
Well, I think it's just important to feel like that you can have the conversation. You don't need to hold back. You talk to your children about everything else. Mental illness and mental challenges are just as important as everything else that you teach your children. And knowing that it's okay that if they're depressed, if they're down, if they're having these suicidal thoughts, that they're not alone, that a lot of people have these things, and that there are tools and resources to help them that are out there, that and we are trying to let people know about those resources through our programs.
Yeah, and Scott, let's have you weigh in on that a little more. As a clinical therapist, what are some of the tools and resources available at your disposal in addressing this issue?
Yeah, let me just emphasize what Kristen just said. So many kids in particular that we lose to suicide have never interacted with a mental health professional before. 40% have. That means 60% have never had a chance to talk to somebody who could provide some help. So the first thing is actually to bridge that gap, to have that conversation. If somebody were having chest pain, we'd say, oh my gosh, you're having chest pain, how can we help you? The same thing if people are having emotional problems. We should be coming with the same amount of vigor and attention and care. And the tools are things that we can teach kids. There are things related around problem solving. There are things related around being specific. There are actually a lot of things about asking for help. We have a cultural phenomenon in our country where we sort of think everything has to be on our own shoulders. And the reality is if you injure your knee, nobody's going to ask you to run a marathon tomorrow. So why, when people have emotional challenges, do we expect them to run those emotional marathons the next day? We have to make a breakthrough in how we reach our kids and allow them to be human and to be vulnerable.
That's a really important point, but sometimes it's not going to be as clear as, hey, I need help. But maybe there are signs. So parents, siblings, loved ones, what can they be looking out for when someone may be reaching out, but it's not real plain?
Yeah, this is the most common thing. So a kid might say something about being super tired, or not wanting to go to dance, or not wanting to go to softball. There's just sort of a disengagement, a pulling back. And that's really hard in the context of the pandemic because of the isolation conditions that we've been talking about before. So if kids are having trouble with sleep, if you find them sleeping too little or sleeping too much, or if you find them withdrawing from social interactions, those are sort of big warning signs. Or if they're missing assignments in school when before they weren't, these are all things that are indicators of a change in behavior, and you want to dig deeper and sort of clear the air and make it safe for them to tell you, yeah, I'm having trouble. And then you as an adult saying, okay, we can work with this. This is okay. This is part of being human. It's not a problem that can't be solved. It's something we can work on.
Kristen, we mentioned you are with Dance for Life. So talk about the element of being involved in an activity and how that can help lift our mental health.
Oh, absolutely. And there's been study after study showing that physical activity, I've been in the dance industry for 30 years, so that's been our physical activity. But any physical activity creates endorphins, and endorphins results in happier feelings, feeling good about ourselves. So being active is very important in mental health and to keep us happier. So yeah, any physical. I, of course, have dance, and I've created this Dance for Life because I think dance is very therapeutic. And it can help relieve stress, relieve anxiety. We all feel better after we go to the gym, right? You feel better.
For sure.
And it does help with mental health, having those physical activities.
Okay. Scott, this is a show about politics. Talking politics can get ugly. Any tips or recommendations on what people need to be looking out for when you see the divisiveness and the vitriol across the country?
Yeah. I wish I had a great answer for this. Our kids are looking to us to lead, and to lead with compassion and to lead with reason. And right now we have a lot of heat, a lot more heat than light. And so I ask all parents to take a step back and ask, if my child was watching me engage with someone on social media or in a parking lot or in a conversation, would I be proud of the example I'm setting for my child? And if the answer is no, then you yourself can actually get some help on that too.
Yeah.
You don't have to be divisive. And I say this and I mean it. Every child is sacred to me. And it doesn't matter whether they're red or blue or white or green or purple, or whether their family is conservative or not conservative or liberal. It doesn't matter. They are sacred, and they are a resource that we should be protecting and encouraging. and I hope we can do that.
Okay, very well said. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, but I do want to point out the annual Dance for Life Suicide Prevention Gala. It's happening this Saturday, September 25th at East High School, and it's an all-day event. So get out there and participate if you can. Kristen, real quick, how can people find more information on that?
You can go to danceforlifenation.org is our website, and you can find out more information. The forum and the show are completely free.
Okay.
And then the master classes, you can sign up for those as well.
All right, very important conversation. Appreciate both of your perspectives. Thanks for being here with us this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn.
Still to come, Utah Governor Spencer Cox taking the national stage in opposition to the president's vaccine mandate plan. Our panel debates that a little bit later. But first, a group of senators coming up with a plan on the voting rights bill, but not everyone's on board. The latest after the break. Former Presidents Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, and Barack Obama are launching a new organization to help streamline the process of resettling Afghan refugees here in the United States. Washington correspondent Rashad Hudson has more.
Former U.S. presidents and current governors are stepping up to help resettle roughly 65,000 Afghan refugees in the U.S.
One of the things that makes Americans so great, so exceptional, is the limitless scope of our compassion.
Maryland Governor Larry Hogan and Colorado Governor Jared Polis are partnering with Welcome U.S., the organization working with government, business, and faith-based groups to provide basic needs for refugees.
Our immigrant and refugee communities help strengthen the fabric of who we are.
Many of the refugees coming to America are those who helped the U.S. during the war.
We believe that welcoming and embracing Afghan refugees embodies the best of the American spirit.
On Capitol Hill, some lawmakers are calling on the Biden administration to raise the refugee cap to allow thousands of more people to settle here in the U.S. Massachusetts Senator Ed Markey would like to see that number increase to 200,000.
I think it's a number that we should all strive to meet in order to ensure that these individuals not only survive but thrive in their new environment.
But Wisconsin Senator Ron Johnson questions whether the Department of State is doing enough to properly screen refugees.
What do we screen them against? I mean, our ISIS terrorists, our Al-Qaeda terrorists, have we biometrically screened them in the past so that we can compare them to a database?
Reporting in Washington, Rashad Hudson.
Senate Democrats are making another push to pass voting reforms on Capitol Hill. Senators reaching a deal Tuesday on a new voting rights measure they hope will make it across the finish line, but Republicans are already shooting down the bill. Washington correspondent Kelly Meyer has the latest.
Our democracy is on the line.
On Tuesday, a group of senators joined voting rights advocates as they introduced a new voting rights measure they hope can avoid the Republican bloc that doomed earlier versions. The bill sets standards for voter registration, mail-in voting, and bans partisan gerrymandering, while also making Election Day a public holiday.
Basic national standards that make sure that all Americans can vote.
The legislation builds off a framework proposed by West Virginia Democrat Joe Manchin, who opposed the previous measure. Manchin, along with 7 other senators, including Oregon's Jeff Merkley, are pushing for a vote in the next few weeks.
It's before the end of October.
But it isn't just a matter of getting senators like Joe Manchin on board. Democrats will need at least 10 Republicans to pass the legislation, and Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell is already shooting down the revised bill.
There is no reason for the federal government to take over how we conduct elections.
Several red states have enacted their own voting laws, which they say will make elections more secure. But Democrats believe the measures will make it harder for people, especially minority groups, to vote. And that's why they want the federal government to step in.
Time is of the essence.
Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer says he hopes to hold a vote as early as next week. That vote is likely to fail unless some Republicans change their minds. Reporting in Washington, I'm Kelly Meyer.
Coming up, Salt Lake City Mayor Aaron Mendenhall extending the mask mandate at city schools. We'll take that up with the panel after the break.
You're watching Inside Utah Politics.
Time now to debate some of the big stories of the week with the Inside Utah Politics panel. This week we have State Auditor John Dougal and former State Senator Scott Howell. Gentlemen, great to have both of you on the show. Thanks for being here.
Great to be.
Thanks for the invite.
There's a little bit to talk about this week, right? Let's start off with The vaccine mandate. Obviously, this was a bigger story when it was unveiled a couple weeks ago, but it's still lingering into this previous week as well. The governor taking the national stage and questioning the constitutionality of it. John, let's start with you. Is it constitutional?
Personally, I don't think it is. I think it's a horrible overreach, and it's even a stretch of what statute says about federal OSHA and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, it isn't really about is it constitutional or not. It fundamentally, I think, comes back to the governor's encouraging folks to get vaccines. He thinks that will help in terms of the economy, in terms of the health, in terms of our hospitals. But at the end of the day, with the president trying to force and mandate it, and this is something that he was even skeptical of a year ago when he was running for president, you know, people are going to push back. People are going to fight against it. I don't think this helps the situation. I don't think this has really encouraged more folks to get vaccines. In fact, it's going to cause some that were maybe on the fence to push back and say, hey, if you're going to force me, then forget it, I'm out.
Scott, we have heard the president on record before saying he did not believe it needed to be mandated. So why the change, and is it necessary?
Well, I think the change is pretty simple. He's concerned about the increase in COVID rates, and all of us should be concerned about that. It's still deadly. I think we've seen that the Delta variant can be very deadly, and I was surprised, I really was, that he came out and said that. Now, to me, this whole argument is just so crazy. Everybody go get your shot, and we'll end this. I mean, that's really what it is. And what more, you see the LDS Church coming out, you see faith leaders coming out, you see elected officials, the governor coming out, the senators and all that. It's beyond my comprehension of what really people are thinking about, why they just won't get that vaccine. And so for me, I don't think we should be mandating anything, and I agree with John about the Constitution. I think it's an overreach, but we come to a point, I guess, where the president just feels like if we don't do this, we're going to be in serious trouble.
John, I'd like your thoughts on that based on the first answer you gave. Cases are rising. They're at a higher rate right now than they were this time last year. Also, what Scott brings up about what we've heard from religious leaders. It's very interesting to see the cultural war play out on a religion angle of this. Why is that happening?
Well, I think there's a whole bunch of folks that are questioning. They're not quite sure. They don't feel like the government has been truly honest with them over the past year and a half. And so they're skeptical about what's going on. And so trying to force them and compel them is just going to cause kickback, like I mentioned. And this is where you need to reach out. You have to better understand what the concerns are and look to mitigate those concerns and bring folks along rather than try and force them and have them kick back.
Scott, you mentioned the difference between the federal approach and the state approach. State leaders, by and large, are saying, look, we want you to go get vaccinated, but we're not going to force it. So how is this ultimately going to play out when the president looks to implement this?
Well, I think it's going to be very challenging, and I think it's going to be mandated probably by most businesses now. And that's a different story. At IBM, we had a policy there on firearms. You could bring one into the office, but if you did, that was your last day there. And that was just a condition of employment. And I think you're going to see more and more businesses taking that. I think the airlines are going to request that that you get vaccinated. But I want to just go back a little bit on this. You talked about the cultural war that's developing. It was President Trump who stood in front of everyone and said, I got my vaccine. Go get your vaccination. And so I don't know where this tier of people are that are not really paying attention to what's going on. It's mind-boggling to me. It really is.
Well, and I'd like to get your thoughts on that, John, because this was, President Trump is the one that put this vaccine into motion. He is encouraging people to get it. We're seeing a lot of people on the Republican side, high up, encouraging people to get it. So where does the resistance come from?
Remember, before this even hit us, the pandemic, we had folks on the left and the right who were very concerned about vaccines. Some called them the anti-vaxxers, other things like that. And so we had this momentum already building before the pandemic hit. And rather than looking and trying to understand what their concerns are and try and educate them about the benefits and the trade-offs associated with vaccines, we've now super enhanced this whole debate because of the pandemic. And like I said, there's been issues about masks and about distancing and about all sorts of other dynamics that unfortunately the CDC has not been sufficiently humble as they've said, we don't understand the dynamics of the pandemic. we're trying to learn and adapt as we go along, and so things are going to change. They gave kind of ultimatums the whole way along, as if they knew how this thing was going to respond and how it was going to act, rather than saying, hey, we're all in this together, we got to figure it out together.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things we don't know.
But one other thing real quick, some people jump on those inconsistencies and they don't accept the fact that things are just changing as we go. Why is that?
Well, because folks have overstated things in the past, and so therefore it's like, okay, if you lied about that thing, what are you lying about today? And yeah, they're going to latch on to all sorts of excuses to say, hey, I got a problem with this, I got a concern with that. And so we need to step back and say, okay, how do we help bring folks along?
Scott,
yes, there are folks that are going to have problems with the vaccine. We have to recognize those.
Scott, any final thoughts on that?
I was impressed that the LDS Church sent out a letter to all those in California who were requesting religious exemption for the vaccinations, and the directive was very clear. Do not sign that on behalf of any member. And so I think that sends a strong message. But John's right in the sense that people didn't really know. I mean, and the conspiracy theories on this are just unbelievable out there. I mean, I heard this guy, he got the vaccination 2 weeks ago and got bitten by a moose. And he said, see, there it is. That's what happens when you get a vaccination. And I'm thinking,
stay out of Alaska.
Stay out of Alaska.
Yeah, there's a lot of Uncle John's theory moving around on social media. Real quick,
wait a second. What?
Yeah, I guess I should have used a different name. I did not mean you there, but you get the point. Real quick, we're running out of time, but I want to get your thoughts on Salt Lake City's mask mandate. The city, both the mayor and city council, voting to extend that. John, what are you seeing? Not Uncle John, but John Dougal, what are you seeing as this plays out when you compare Salt Lake City to other districts?
Well, I think one of the key things, first of all, I think Salt Lake City versus other districts, you're not really seeing a benefit or a drawback. I mean, there's schools that don't have a mask mandate that seem to be fewer cases with COVID in their schools than Salt Lake City School District, and some with more. And so it's kind of all over the map. I think what I've heard from a lot of parents that live in the Salt Lake City area is they're just glad to be back in school. After last year with the school district dragging their feet excessively long and not having kids back in the classroom, I think so many parents, hey, whatever it takes, we're just glad to be back in the classroom.
Scott, your thoughts on what you are seeing in comparing districts and what's happening and the Salt Lake City's mandate on masks?
Well, I think the data is really the key in all of this. And if you take into consideration that Salt Lake City School District started 1 week later than the others, and you compile that and go back and look at the averages, I'm not so sure the effectiveness of that. But I do applaud Mayor Mendenhall for trying at least to come up with some solution. But I'm not sure how much longer the legislature will tolerate the things that have happened in our capital city. And it's not only masks, but there's a litany of things that are going on down there that I see this tension building all the time. And we need leaders to come together. We've got to come together as a local community, a state, and the cities to figure out what are we really going to do. And take out all the ideology on this, and let's do the right thing for families and for our children.
Yeah, we are already starting to see legislation addressing the vaccine mandate and potentially the mask mandates as well. Gentlemen, we have run out of time. Really appreciate your perspective. Thanks for being here with us.
Thanks so much.
Always a pleasure with Frugal Dougal and you, Glenn. Thank you very much.
The 1 million vote man as well.
Yeah, right.
All right, stay with us. We'll be right back with more Inside Utah Politics right after the break. We'll leave you now to look at what's on the radar in the world of politics. The U.S. Senate back in session. The House will join them on Monday. The municipal general election is set for Tuesday, November 2nd. 23 municipalities are trying out ranked choice voting. Make sure to connect with me on social media. I'd like to know what you think of this show and other issues that are important to you. You can also email me at InsideUtahPolitics@abc4.com. Follow me on Twitter and Facebook. Just log on and search Glenn Mills, ABC4. Thanks so much for making us part of your Sunday morning. We hope to see you again next week as we go inside Utah politics.